everyone, welcome back to That Heathen Bastard. Remember that this is not a news show, this is a platform for talking points. So if you want news, please watch Tim Pool, Black Conservative Perspective, and Stick Sex and Hammer 666. Those are the channels I would promote. And with that being said, let us begin. Now, today I want to talk about the idea of Western civilization is in a valley. What do I mean by this? Well, I'm first going to talk about the idea of peaks and valleys, both in the literal and metaphorical sense. This is going to be a fairly philosophical topic, so I'm sure you should be able to catch up with it easily enough. This is not necessarily the most in-depth topic, but it is very, very intellectual and a little bit nerdy. So, here we go. So, obviously, when we have peaks, we were talking about the tops of mountains. And we have when we have valleys, we were talking about the flat valleys underneath. In the literal sense, this is simply topography. In the metaphorical sense, we are talking about the height of something, its zenith, and then the flat plane is essentially the area below, the realm of failure and smallness, lack of success, etc. And in the end of it, we all have our peaks and valleys. We have our good days, we have our bad days, right? These are the bad days. Right now, these are the bad days for Western civilization. This is the valley. This is where things go down into decline and into being less great, being inferior, having a lot to prove once again. And we are currently experiencing this valley while in the presence of globalism, which is now inevitable. Globalism being the idea that we are now becoming more of a global village. We're becoming more connected thanks to the internet. We're becoming one world, one voice, as opposed to many voices. And globalism is basically inevitable because it's not so much a deliberate process as a process of people communicating with one another and rubbing off on one another as they communicate. That is essentially what's going to happen. Now, while we're in the valley, that means our civilization culture is vulnerable to cross-infection, cross-pollination, and delusion. Or, not delusion, dilution, to be diluted. To be diluted and watered down, and to be less a shadow of its former self. This is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. It's certainly not desirable. And there are some people who are deliberately engaging with it, but there are others who aren't. It's mixed. And generally speaking, young people are engaging in multiculturalism quite a lot. And I'm saying this as someone who comes from the millennial generation. When we were younger, we were engaging in a great deal of multiculturalism. We were engaging in anime and Godzilla, eating Mexican food, etc., etc. Not really, well, Mexican food, they're Western culture, they're Western civilization. That's a Western hemisphere country, and I would argue that Native American culture is Western. They are part of the Western civilization. But, imports, Japanese cars, Japanese food. Japan culture was cross-infecting very much through the 80s and the 70s. A little bit in the 60s, it shows up in the 60s a little bit. But then it slowly dies down. And peaks at around 2001 to 2003, at the height of Japanophiles, weeaboos, anime, Godzilla, etc. This is sort of the multicultural behavior, participating in culture institutions from other nations, and sort of cross-pollinating. This is not necessarily a bad thing. I still watch anime and I love Godzilla, right? But it's okay to occasionally take part in the cultural institutions of another nation, but there comes a time when you have to acknowledge the cultural institutions of your own nation and your own culture. They need equal emphasis. That being said, in order to preserve them, you need to engage with them. That is necessary. And when it comes right down to it, this engagement in multiculturalism is contributing to the dilution of Western civilization and becoming diluted and watered down with outside foreign elements. That is not to say those foreign elements are to be feared. necessarily. But if you engage with them more and more and your own culture less and less, you are watering down and making it something other than a shadow of its former self. It loses its identity. Now, with that being said, there are lesser known elements of Western culture and civilization that are asserting themselves. There's Hema, which is historical European martial arts. That's Hema. That's a Western institution. That's not theatrical sword fighting, but actual like competitive sword fighting. It's very popular because the medieval era is easily the easiest part of Western civilization to represent. Everybody loves the medieval era because of RPGs and J.R.R. Tolkien and other such things. And those elements, like Hema and amateur blacksmithing or even professional blacksmithing, are beginning to reassert themselves somewhat. You also see more RPGs being made. You see the return of classical European religion, like Norse heathenry or Greek Hellenism. If you're a Hellenist or a heathen, shout out. Right, you're restoring these older traditions and modernizing and bringing them into the modern world. And you are helping it grow. And we need to be doing more of that and less of engaging in multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is fine, you can do it if you want, but you need to spend a certain amount of time respecting your native culture. You should show an equal amount of reverence. And there are foreign Western ideas in foreign media, which helps to reinforce Western cultural values, right? You can engage in a kind of multiculturalism that involves a clear cross-pollination from us to them, as opposed to them to us. Case in point, there is, once again, to go to anime as a common example, there is the example of Goblin Slayer. Now, as a warning, the pilot episode is extremely graphic and very difficult to watch. It was talked about in the YouTube medieval community for a while. It was pretty aggressive. You have a young woman in her late teens being sexually molested, and one of her male companions is being chewed on, eaten alive by goblins. And the depiction is unfortunately extremely realistic. Right? When you get cut, you don't scream. When someone starts cutting you, don't scream. You actually exhale heavily and kind of halfway whisper and whimper, like, that's sort of the realistic depiction. And as the dude is being eaten alive and they're biting into his shoulder, like, he's literally going, it's like, ugh! You know, they're going really over the top. I'm sorry if I terrified anyone there. But if you can get past that pilot episode, you see elements of Western civilization all over that in regards to classical mythology. That is a restoration of how goblins would have been seen as a mythological beast in the Viking Age. Not as some cute little guy who's a little mischievous guarding a pot of gold, but as a literal cannibal who will eat you and rape your sister. Those were the kinds of evils they thought existed in the supernatural world, and that they had to fight with the gods on their side, or their ancestors. And who's to say these things don't exist? Maybe they do. Who knows? But there's examples like Goblin Slayer, there's Western civilization culture all over Full Metal Alchemist. It's reflected quite well in Japan, as well as some healthy criticisms. There's also Chinese multiculturalism. And we have more to fear from the Chinese multiculturalism, obviously, because more and more we're hearing about these movies being made in China where we're being reflected on negatively, and it's basically evolving into a kind of propaganda. Right? They're making us look bad on purpose because they hate us. Right? They're the good communists and we're the evil capitalists. Yeah, good communist indeed. Tell that to the Uyghur Muslims and the Falun Gong, and they'll probably just laugh or cry, or maybe both. Maybe they'll laugh and cry. In the end, we have some cultural allies, some strong ones, but definitely not in China. We do have South Korea, we do have Japan as cultural allies in Southeast Asia. They respect and honor some of our traditions. They like us well enough. Well, then maybe the occasional gripe. But RPGs are a place where Western culture lives. Also in Hema and things of that nature. Western-themed animes. It's not all gone. But being proactive is extremely important while we're in the decline. Resurrecting ancient religions, bringing back certain cultural institutions like Holmgang, which is essentially honor duels with swords, which is perfectly possible for those to be non-fatal, right? They don't have to be fatal. You can fight in a sword duel with, I think, CBP pipe. That is fairly close. It's sort of polystained CBP. It's similar to actual metal, but it can't cut you. It probably hurts like hell, I imagine. I don't actually know that's true. But at the end of the day, your behavior at your peak will reflect on you in the valley, when you're in the valley. And that's where things really go south. Where things really go downhill. Because truth is, for America specifically, under the presidency of Andrew Jackson, our Navy went around bullying other nations for money and support. We harassed people. We went to war. We went to the forever wars in the Middle East and Afghanistan. We did some pretty horrible things to each other, to others. We engaged in horrible acts, and that reflects poorly on us now that we are being overshadowed by growing powers like China. That the Eastern Bloc, the former Eastern Bloc, that China is on the rise in power, even as their people starve. Because communism is really not very good at feeding people, you know. That's sort of capitalism's realm. That's what we do really well, you know, as we feed people. Certainly better than China. But when it comes right down to it, while they are rising and we are on the decline, our past behaviors reflect on us poorly. That does not mean we need to guilt ourselves or burden ourselves with excess shame over these actions. Simply that we need to acknowledge them and vow that we never do them again and change those patterns of behavior. That alone should be simply enough. Forget the SJWs or the wokies or whatever the hell they're calling themselves now. Right? They want you to feel guilt and shame. Irrational guilt and shame just because you happen to live in the same place or have the same skin color as an evil villain from forever ago. So you now have to feel irrational shame and guilt for something you didn't even do. That's not okay. I would argue that's straight up abusive. And you can't give in to that. But you do have to improve on yourself and be better than those who came before you. At the end of the day, cultural conservatism and building culture is needed. That is to say, we need to build new institutions in the spirit of the old as well as revive the old ones. We need to engage in Hema, we need to engage in Holmgang, we need to enjoy what we have. We need to play Diablo, we need to play old Final Fantasy games, we need to play Dungeons and Dragons and revel in this picture in time of like the Middle Ages. And we need to engage in these earlier traditions, and we need to remember the Constitution of the United States and the founders and those who came before us. We need to respect them while rebuking them. We rebuke them for their failures and respect them for their successes. Because no one is so evil to be without merit, and no one is so good to be without fault. That is the truth of human nature. Now, there is the possibility of Renaissance and zeitgeists in the future. There could be a Western Renaissance, and I see the return of religions such as heathenry and Hellenism and other traditions as being something of a Renaissance. I see the growing popularity of Hema and other traditions as a kind of zeitgeist that is positive. So that's a good start. We may even be able to resurrect pistol duels, but make it so that they're not fatal. Find a way to do a pistol duel without actually killing anyone. Make it a kind of non-lethal competition, or otherwise maybe just stick to the realm of honor duels in Hema or Holmgang for now, because firearms are a completely different issue from swords or knives or things of that nature. But there's possible zeitgeists on the rise, so be a lookout for that. Now, obviously, at the end of the day, we need to be PPR. And I know I say at the end of the day a lot. I apologize for that. It's just kind of how I speak. And I also tend to ramble on slightly and be very... I pontificate more than I honestly probably should. But I'm a pedantic, pontificating bastard, a steaming, worthless pile of cow dung. Figuratively speaking. But we need to be PPR, which is peaceful, persuasive, and respectful. Right? We need to not be violent. We need to not use pejorative terms. We need to give each other room to breathe and be respectful at the end of the day. And to be socially libertarian means to respect the individual liberty and freedom of the person. As long as you are not harming anyone else, do as you please. If they are engaging in multiculturalism, maybe take them aside and explain to them why they should instead show equal reverence to your own native culture as to other cultures, but not force them to be purely Western, right? But just say, like, hey, you have a native tradition you should honor, right? This is their culture. What about yours? What's Western? Right? And maybe someday I'll have a kid of my own and he'll look up at me and be like, Diablo? And I'll be like, right, Diablo. Want to play some Diablo 3? Right? Because that's based on the Book of Enoch. That's based on the Book of Enoch. And as much as I hate to admit it, unfortunately Christianity is part of Western civilization, even if it did usurp it from its pagan creators. They are still a part of it nonetheless, and that is an important thing to acknowledge. So there you have it. We just need to be proactive while we're in the valley. We do not need irrational guilt and shame, but we need to build our culture, build our society, and continue to build it and refine it and make it better. And respect for the successes of the past, while rebuking the failures of it as well. With that being said, there will be a link down below in the description to my books. Please buy, download, and read them. And as always, tschüss, peace.